Before we get started, this video has been a long-awaited request by many of the Subscribe Star Bros. Now yes, technically this is a Halloween movie, but this video is something that I think fits the Valentine season. Cause who doesn't love coming back from the dead to get revenge on the guys who killed your girl? Yeah, it's gonna be a wild ride. Bet you all feel like little worms on a big fucking hook.
Firewake for the mothers and the fathers. No pain anymore, no pain anymore. Stay awake for the last and the others. No pain anymore, no pain anymore. Eyes open for the miracles and wonders. It won't rain anymore, no pain anymore. Every time you were so sure that nothing went right, it's coming back to haunt you and demand an eye for eye.
The Crow. Yep, it's time to talk about one of the most beloved comic book movies out there. Funny enough, one that probably a lot of people didn't even know came from a comic book. You see, the 90s were an interesting time. Before Marvel and DC really took over the world with their comic book adaptations, you had a bit more of a Wild West in regards to the landscape. Christopher Reeve's Superman and the Tim Burton Batman films showed that you could take this medium and push it into film to resounding success. But it took a while for the big two themselves to really hit the stride that would eventually snowball into the Goliaths we know today. Instead, you had a very experimental era where everyone was looking to this medium and seeing what could be done with it. Some are so technical that it kind of strains the definition, like Conan the Barbarian has comic books, but you wouldn't really say the Arnold movie adapts those. It's more of an all-around adaptation of the character and focusing more on the short stories by Robert E. Howard. Some are radically different from the source material, like how The Mask went from a violent story about how ultimate power corrupts everyone eventually, to a kid-friendly live-action cartoon. You also had stuff like Tank Girl, which baffled audiences due to the nature of what it was adapting, and showing that something like this probably needed to be more of an animated series than a live-action. Spawn from 1997 is something that was cut to pieces from what was originally the story, but still has a soft spot in some people's hearts, taking a grim and edgy story and making it more of an action comedy. You get the idea. There's a lot that came out in this time period as everyone was rushing to get to the next big gold mine before they missed their chance. And there are some legitimate gems that are just unironically good that came out. The Rocketeer was basically proto-Captain America, a genuinely fun adventure movie that I just wholeheartedly recommend. It's actually just damn good. Shockingly so considering you don't hear a lot of people talk about it. You even had movies that weren't really inspired by actual comic books, but more so the vibe and spirit. Darkman from 1990 by Sam Raimi isn't actually adapting any character, mainly because it was at first intended to be an adaptation to The Shadow, but since they couldn't get the rights to do a full movie, instead a Shadow movie will come out 4 years later starring Alec Baldwin, Sam Raimi just decided to make his own character. Inspired by Hammer horror and the superhero comics he read as a kid, and it's a genuinely fascinating mixture that weirdly enough works. You get the idea, there's a lot to talk about here, but we're talking about one of the bigger titles that has one hell of a story behind it, both for the movie and the comic itself. The Crow. The Crow is the 1994 adaptation of the comic series by the same name by James O'Barr. The story follows Eric, a guy with the worst luck in the world, as he and his girlfriend are brutally murdered by thugs. Eric is shot in the head and paralyzed, helpless to watch as his girlfriend is raped and tortured. After the two die, Eric is mysteriously resurrected a year later to get revenge on the men who attacked them. The comic, if it's not obvious, ain't exactly a happy story. It's very bleak, and it makes it clear that things aren't gonna magically get better after Eric gets his targets. It's essentially a ghost story. The tragedy already happened, it's too late to fix any of it. The best that can happen is the men responsible are punished. The comic all around is a very different vibe than the movie. The movie's kind of more of a pulse-pounding action movie that still has an emotional through line in it, but the comic is all about the emotion. It's not a very logical story. Eric is basically a ghost, so it treats him like one, able to float from place to place without much issue. And the main struggle he deals with is not being consumed by the despair of what happened to him. You also don't find out a lot in the story. How is Eric back from the dead? What's the extent of his resurrection? Are there some larger supernatural shenanigans going on? You don't ever really get an answer, because that's not the point of The Crow. It's essentially more of an obituary than something with a fleshed out plot, or like a creepy ghost story you hear offhandedly. I might be looking at some of the pages on screen and thinking, Jesus, don't cut yourself on all that edge. And yeah, It's a very edgy story. Eric constantly monologues about his inner pain, he tries to kill himself multiple times, the world it builds all around is very grim and miserable. But there's a reason for that. You see, James O'Barr created The Crow for a reason. Unfortunately, it's a therapy piece for him. You see, the inspiration behind the story comes from a personal tragedy that he suffered. James O'Barr had a girlfriend that was killed in a hit-and-run incident from a drunk driver. The sheer senselessness ate him alive, especially since he was just 18 years old and the two were freshly engaged, being together since high school. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, O'Barr's pretty open that the story was his way of processing her death. The reason he gets so introspective and focuses only on Eric's psychology is because he's basically James O'Barr's self-insert. He also clarified that the story didn't even really help with his ability to move on. If anything, it just made him indulge in the despair and anger more, something that makes sense when you read it, as the story never really has any bright light of hope. You have a single subplot where Eric helps a young girl with her junkie mother, which is referenced in the film, but that's about it. And even then, the story makes it clear that it's not going to be easy for her, even with Eric's help. Other than that, it's all about vengeance, which is weirdly fitting for the story. Eric truly believes that there's nothing else to exist for beyond revenge. As soon as he gets the last man, he goes back to his grave to return to the land of the dead, content that him and Shelley can be together again. All Eric wanted was to stay dead, but he was brought back to get revenge. If anything, being brought back is kind of a burden to him, since he's forced to relive the memories over and over again. It's not as badass as the film, and it's not really meant to be. The comic absolutely has badass moments, don't get me wrong, but the point is that Eric doesn't want to be like this. He's so full of rage that he's a death spirit, something that can't rest until things are put right. He's not driven out of a sense of justice, his motivation is sheer pain. The only way to make the pain stop is to kill everyone responsible. The comic is a great read. It's a very different story with its focus on tragedy and this very unconventional anti-hero. But calling him an anti-hero is weird considering he never harms innocent people, and he even goes out of his way to help them more than a few times. I guess you could see the Crow as essentially being a supernatural version of the Punisher, but instead of going on a general war on crime, he's got specific targets. And yeah, there's a very clear goth aesthetic to it, but using that term feels a tad fake considering the story's backed by legitimate tragedy. This isn't some guy writing an edgy story just to say fuck you mom and dad, it was somebody who had some very real shit he was dealing with, and that vibe bleeds into the story all over the place. The parts where Eric and Shelley are spending time together just have this air of dread to them, not just because you know how it all ends, but having the context of O'Barr's life makes you wonder if some of these parts were based on personal experience. Just feeling that depressing tone all the more, that this guy was in mourning and he just wanted to make sense of something that was senseless. Hell, when Eric is brought back, the guy's a babbling lunatic, constantly referencing the fact that his tragedy made no sense, it just happened. No reason, no motive, simply because Eric and Shelley were there. To drive the point further, the actual way Shelley and Eric die is based off a separate incident. James O'Barr based their murders off a carjacking incident in Chicago he read about, a pointless crime by a bunch of scumbags that just victimized people because they could. I highly recommend reading the comic. There's a few different sequels as well, but I never really sat down to read all of them. From what I hear, some are pretty good, and they toy around with the concept that anyone could be brought back if their death is terrible enough. But this isn't the point of the video. We're focusing on the film. By the way, yeah, now it's time to actually talk about the movie. The 1994 film starring Brandon Lee, who's such a famous part of it that more people know he was in this movie than the guy who even directed it. It was Alec Proyas, by the way, who actually made a few different movies that were pretty good, like Dark City, and he also made that Will Smith I, Robot movie, which is alright. Like, as an Asimov adaptation, it's terrible, but as just an action movie, it's not bad, it's decent fun. Still, The Crow is easily his most popular film, for good reasons, and a really bad one, which we'll talk about later. For now, let's just give some context for the film itself. All around, it's a pretty faithful adaptation to the actual comic. Pretty much every character is brought into the story, though some are renamed, you have some new ones, and you get more depth to each one, from their personalities to their general history and role in the setting. In the comic, the gang that goes after Eric are Tom Tom, Top Dollar, Funboy, T-Bird, and Tintin. The movie basically brings them over, but they had another guy by the name of Skank. I don't remember if Tom Tom's actually in the movie or not, I don't think he is. And they changed the role of one of the gang members. Top Dollar is still in the story, but now he's not just some Randy that dies early. He's now the head honcho instead of T-Bird. So it's 99% the same story, but with variations to fit it into a film and have a more complete story. Some scenes are adapted page by page, lines are directly quoted, though there are remixes. Certain moments are either passed over or rewritten for various reasons. Like the Jesus walks into a motel joke is quoted when Eric goes after Funboy instead of when he goes after Tom Tom. And they never address the fact that Crow itself could speak to Eric, guiding him on his journey. Instead, it's just kind of a general MacGuffin that comes into play by the end. Also, they changed Eric into being a rock star famously for the movie, when in the comic he was actually just some mechanic. You get the point. It's the same story, just told in a different way. And the next thing to talk about is the actual technicals of the film. Visually, the movie's fantastic. It sticks to this grungy, dirty tone from beginning to end. Damn near every single scene is shot at night. The amount of times you actually see sunlight can be counted on one hand. And the sheer grunge of this city is impossible to ignore. You really feel this setting is a shithole. Now, it's still better than real-life Detroit, but it's close to being as bad. Another thing to mention is the music. The soundtrack leans on atmospheric, almost industrial style. You can have moments where it's haunting chants, and then gets slammed by 9 Inch Nails, all of which match the gothic vibe the story's going for. And of course, you have to mention the collaboration with The Cure, who wrote the song Burn for the film, which is a standout track, acting as basically the theme song of the movie. It's a great one that really fits the vibe of the film. You can tell The Cure got what The Crow is supposed to be. A story that on the surface is ball-busting revenge, but in truth, it's more about tragedy and grief. So the music works and the visuals work. Anything else to mention? Well, obviously you have the cast, which is pretty jam-packed with people. You have Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott, Joe Polito, David Patrick Kelly, Tony Todd, and of course, Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee himself, in his big breakout role. You see, Brandon Lee for years was trying to escape from his father's shadow. Yeah, his dad was the star of some downright amazing kung fu movies, but Brandon didn't want to be seen as just the son of a martial arts legend. He wanted to be respected as an actor on his own terms. He built his career with some action films, yeah, but he saw The Crow as his big chance to break out in America, so he puts 110% into the role. People talk all the time about different pitch-perfect comic book castings. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Robert Downey as Tony Stark, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. It's talked about all the time. And one of the agreed-upon choices is that Brandon Lee is Eric Draven. The dude really steals the show and did whatever possible to embody the character. Not just that he's a total badass in the action scenes, but he understands the nuances and little details that make the character interesting. Eric can go from maniacally ranting at one of his targets to showing more of that vulnerability and pain buried deep down, and the transition between them feels natural. Eric as a character is someone so consumed with hatred that even trying to be playful with somebody is painted by his rage. Some scenes you can see him physically shaking trying to hold himself back, and the minute he gets pissed off it's like a switch flips and he can't control himself. The scenes where he banters with somebody can be genuinely funny, either in a dark way where he's fucking with somebody to get in their heads, or he's allowed a moment to just let his guard down, showing more of his real personality behind the persona.
Mr. Gideon, who? I'm not paying attention.
Now, there's a reason for all this. One, the casting all around is fantastic. Every character is likable or interesting in their own way, and they all have really good chemistry with each other. Even a small-time guy like Tintin, the first to get whacked, has moments that shows there's way more to the guy than just being a bad guy.
Oh, I close this up for you real good, massa.
Fuck you.
Yeah, he's a violent psychopath, but they let him have moments and lines that build his character. Each actor just fits their character. And of course, the other standout beyond Brandon Lee is Michael Wincott as Top Dollar. This guy is easily one of the best comic book villains out there. The dude just chews up every single scene he's in, and he's amazing to watch. He's a villain that doesn't waste a single word. Everything he says has a lot behind it. His monologues and quotes can be highlights of the whole movie itself.
Quick impression for you. Caw, bang, fuck, I'm dead!
And you see the guy has a whole philosophy to him. A very fucked up and terrible one, but a philosophy nonetheless. The dude's an anarchist. He just wants to see the world burn because it's there, and he enjoys every second of it. He's the kind of villain you love to hate, and he's basically a perfect foil to Eric. Now, I think the reason each character feels as fleshed out as they do is because the film had a few different drafts to it. It was written by John Shirley, David J. Shaw, and James O'Barr himself. Shirley and the producer Jeff Most handled the treatments of the early script, and O'Barr directly helped with the screenplay itself. They would filter and workshop elements around until getting the final draft, so the original creator of the series helped out with the script, meaning you get a pretty damn faithful idea of what the story is supposed to feel like and little details for the characters. It also means that it's been refined down, so a lot of the fat's cut. Really, The Crow, all things considered, is a pretty simple story. It does not waste a lot of time at all. Of course, I should mention that the script had a final rewrite to it for a very specific reason. Yeah, no point hiding it anymore. This movie killed a guy. Like, actually dead. You see, Brandon Lee was tragically killed in an on-set accident while filming the movie. Shot by a prop gun that malfunctioned and a piece of the blank entered his chest. Now, there's a common misconception that this accident happened during the scene where Eric confronts Top Dollar and his gang shoots him to pieces. that actually wasn't it. The scene that killed Brandon was the flashback, funny enough, when the gang breaks into Eric and Shelly's apartment. When Funboy shoots Eric, that's actually what killed him. The actor who played Funboy, Michael Massey, was traumatized by it for years after the film, blaming himself for Brandon's death. This, of course, dramatically impacted production. They had to rewrite more than a few scenes to account for the fact that their lead actor was gone. You don't see Brandon Lee himself in more than a few shots in the beginning, instead being portrayed by Chad Stahelski. Yeah, that Chad Stahelski, the creator of the John Wick franchise. He was a stuntman and actually Brandon Lee's body double. The scene where it's all black and you can't see Eric's face, that's Chad. I also had to cut some scenes down due to sheer inability to make it work without him. You were supposed to have Michael Berryman as a cameo role since he would have played the Skull Cowboy, the specter of death that followed Eric around that scene in the comic. The scenes were shot, but cut for the final version. You can actually see images of it online, and it looked kinda dope. Of course, this also adds a strange detail about the movie. A story about senseless and random tragedy has a film adaptation infamous for a senseless and random tragedy. The movie that snuffed out Brandon Lee before he could achieve the same level of fame as his father, because it's widely agreed that he would have had success if he was able to survive the film. Even in the bad movies he was in, it was agreed Brandon Lee was talented. It also adds a haunting layer to the entire movie. A film all about a guy who comes back from the dead as a ghost has an actor that's technically dead in all the scenes you're watching, since he was killed in the shot that's chronologically in the beginning of the story. It adds to that strange ghost story vibe that The Crow is, funny enough, kinda supposed to have. And it's especially strange considering the big difference between the movie and the comic. I mentioned earlier that the comic is essentially an obituary. It's James O'Barr just processing his grief, and even the happy parts are painted by his perspective. Well, the movie, considering it came out sometime after the original publication and James O'Barr was given time to adjust himself, has a very different philosophy. There are scenes where Eric is still haunted by what happened, yes, but you see a different side to him beyond that he truly appreciates life. In the comic, Eric tries to kill himself multiple times. Shooting up drugs, shooting himself, cutting himself, the guy just wants it all to stop. He's essentially in constant agony and looking for an escape. That escape being to kill the gang responsible for his murder. The movie shifts this somewhat. He still wants justice, but it's exactly that, justice. Not a desperate need to just make the pain stop. Eric sets out to right what's wrong to avenge Shelly. He despises the gang for being scumbags and psychopaths that hurt people. And the gang themselves are essentially his total opposites. Careless psychopaths that think life is meaningless. This is embodied by Top Dollar, who's setting up a massive riot in order to destroy the already struggling Detroit simply because he wants to see the city on fire. While the comic is pretty nihilistic itself, the movie instead pushes the idea that Eric now knows more about the importance of life and the people around him. The conversation with Ernie Hudson even spells this out. Nothing is trivial.
Believe me, nothing is trivial.
This says everything about Eric's perspective right there. He's dead. Everything he was and everything he could be is gone, and this humbles him. So he doesn't want the people that are left to waste their time on Earth. It's something that clashes with the general perception of the movie, that it's a goth movie all about how life is pain. No, the movie says the exact opposite. Don't take life for granted because it could be gone before you realize it. The death of Brandon Lee even strangely fits this point as well. You have a guy that's been so long trying to get out from his family's legacy to be seen as his own man, and his life is cut short while making a movie about the importance of appreciating life just for the sake of living. The Crow is a movie that's far deeper than you'd think. Most people look at it and just see a fun 90s action movie, which it absolutely is. But there's so much more under the surface. There's legitimately a lot to chew on, from how it was made, what it says, and the legacy it leaves behind. It really is a movie that should be seen at some point in your life. You won't regret it, whether you're a fan of movies or just want a drunk fun action flick, since it makes both crowds happy. Really, you could argue it's a perfect movie. It knows what it wants to do, and it gets it all done. Even with the horrible tragedy involved, they made it all work. And made something that's an amazing swan song for Brandon Lee. Unintentionally so, but still. And of course, we gotta talk about the sequels. So there's a handful of sequels to The Crow. City of Angels, Salvation, Wicked Prayer, and the reboot that came out in 2024. All of which suck. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing a sequel to the original story. The comics themselves continued and focused on different protagonists and plots, even having wildly different tones. But they all still followed the through line of people brought back from the dead to seek justice on their killers. The movies having different characters than Eric is perfectly okay. If anything, you want to do that. It's just the movies are bad. Now, there are interesting stories behind why each one is bad. City of Angels was the first sequel, coming out in 1996. Due to the success of the original movie, making around $94 million off a $23 million budget, which is very, very good, Miramax wanted to quickly capitalize off this. Even though the death of Brandon Lee made more than a few involved a tad hesitant. Now on paper, the original idea was to always get multiple movies out of it. Brandon Lee signed on for a 3-picture deal, so this was always intended to go on for a bit. But with the main star dead, of course things needed to be shaken up. And James Ardor actually had a few different ideas. The original idea was going to be The Crow, the Bride, a story about a woman resurrected after a massacre at a wedding day, which sounds suspiciously close to Kill Bill. It's been rumored for a while that Miramax essentially swiped the idea from James and made the movie without him. Especially since the reason it was denied does make a lot of sense, saying at the time that no one's going to see an action movie with a female lead. Ignoring, of course, this was 1996, there were already action movies with female protagonists that were extremely popular and successful. Terminator, 1 and 2, Aliens. Hell, they even got David S. Goyer onto the project, and he was becoming known as a comic book movie screenwriter. And even he was up for the idea Ardor was pitching. Though his vision would have put the story in Victorian London and have the antagonist be a sort of supernatural Jack the Ripper, with the protagonist being one of his victims. Now, the point is, more than a few people involved in the sequel wanted to do James's idea, the original creator of the series. But Miramax put their foot down for a kind of cynical reason. You see, the real reason they ditched the concept was because they wanted to capitalize off Brandon Lee, since the look of Eric in the original is a pretty famous part of it. Again, not wanting to radically shake up the icon for the sequel, especially since not a lot of people probably knew The Crow was more of an anthology, but still, it was never really about a singular guy. The original comic is all about Eric, yes, but that's the point. The story's about whoever's resurrected and their journey, their pain, their search for justice. The point is, these are very character-focused stories. Hell, the absolute worst idea they could do is try to bring Eric back, considering that was Brandon Lee's character and everyone understood that was sacred ground. Let him have that be his legacy. And to its credit, City of Angels tries to do things differently. Tried. The setting is now in Los Angeles, City of Angels, get it? And follows a completely different guy, a dude by the name of Ash Corvin, played by Vincent Perez, who's killed by a cartel along with his son after accidentally witnessing a murder. There are actually a lot of details to the sequel that's not completely terrible. There are still references to the comic in the script, and even some subtle nods that readers would catch, like Iggy Pop playing one of the enforcers to the main bad guy, since Iggy Pop was one of the inspirations behind Eric's design. You also have cameos from Thomas Jane and Thu Tang, so you got the Punisher and Power Rangers in the same movie. It's kind of cool. Ash is a mechanic, which was actually Eric's job in the comic, instead of being a rock star. They also wanted Ash to feel completely different from Eric in the way he acts and fights. Ash is more outwardly violent and borderline psychotic, slamming people into pretty much anything and everything. He's also more playful, at times feeling like an emo version of the Joker, which is weirdly fitting. Eric pretty much accepts being a ghost and he feels like a ghost, basically teleporting from place to place and loving showing off his invincibility to people. Ash is more just flat out angry. And to its credit, the main story does try to be radically different from the original, focusing on the supernatural aspects that the first film just kind of glosses over, even bringing back Sarah from the original, who has learned more about the supernatural curse that affected Eric, now acting as the guide for Ash as he goes on his own revenge journey. Unfortunately, this movie is like 40% of what the creators had in mind. The film was chopped to pieces, specifically so it would be closer to the original movie. The thing the director Tim Pope and David S. Goyer were trying to avoid, as they saw it as disrespectful. From the word go, they wanted this to not be the original movie. They changed the visual theme from rain and water to smoke, trying to paint LA as more like hell on earth, which to be fair is accurate, to get across the idea this is not the first movie. Good Bad Flicks has a whole video going over just how different the original version was going to be, showing off a completely different vision that would have involved Ash being trapped on Earth unable to die. You have had a much longer fight between Ash and Kali, the woman who actually killed his son. Yeah, that was supposed to be way more grisly. Ash taking his time to torment her for what she did. You would have had more time between Ash and Sarah, who they try to build up a romantic bond with, which in the actual movie itself feels really fucking rushed because all of it was cut. You also would have found out more about the main villain, including his entire motivation behind why he's doing all of this, that he suffered a near-death experience as a child and because of that he became obsessed with the occult. It will focus on Ash's psychology so you get a better understanding of who he is as a character. There's a lot of this movie that was chopped up and put back together. And you want to know the guy who did all of it? Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, that Harvey Weinstein. On top of being a living hentai squid, the guy was infamous for fucking with movies and usually screwing them up. Reminder, the people involved in the movie wanted to do something completely different, specifically because chasing the coattails of the original would have been cynical and shitty, considering what happened to Brandon. And then Harvey went in and demanded the movie be cut up and re-edited to be more like the original movie nobody wanted to try and recreate. This is on top of disrespecting the wishes of the original creator, who wanted to do The Bride, and then they threw out the Victorian idea that Goyer pitched. Hell, they approved the Goyer script at first, then secretly dumped it and demanded a whole rewrite. It seems like Weinstein was doing whatever possible to just make City of Angels into a cheap copy of the original movie, despite everyone else refusing to do exactly that, because they didn't want to piss on Brandon Lee's memory. No wonder the movie feels choppy and all over the place. It was literally a completely different movie forced to be another. That's sleazy. It doesn't help that Weinstein was a pig of a human, but dude was also just incompetent at his job. Not saying the movie would have been perfect if they stuck to the original vision. The acting is wonky. Plus, it just drags. Adding even more on top of that would probably have made it feel pretty shitty by the end. Of course, maybe it feels like it drags because the tempo's fucked up. The rhythm is off, so it doesn't flow. It's very possible considering the extent of the meddling. And it's funny because City of Angels is only like 84 minutes, a full 18 minutes shorter than the original. Yet, the original movie never feels dull for a second. The ultimate irony is that Weinstein fucked up the movie because he wanted to recreate the success of the original, catch lightning in a ball twice, and all that ended up happening was screwing the movie's chances. It wasn't a total flop. City of Angels would go on to make $25 million against $13 million budget, but the sheer success of the original was not able to be replicated. And of course, there are a few different ways you can actually see the original idea of what they had in mind. There's some novelizations of City of Angels that apparently have the actual script ideas in them. There's a short little comic run that had a few of them, but still basically followed the same structure in the movie. And from what I understand, the actual script treatment is just out online. You can just read it, and it has a whole lot to it. It's the main way how people found out just how different the theatrical is to what they had in mind. Now, like I said, I'm not saying City of Angels would have been up there with the Brandon Lee film if it was 100% what they wanted to do. But difference between a flawed movie and a fucking terrible one. Especially when you know the terrible one literally had nothing to do with what the crew was doing, it was all the producers barging in and fucking things up for them. So yeah, City of Angels sucks. Well, what about the other two sequels? They're bad. But there's a difference between the two. Salvation, to its credit, tries to be completely different from the other films, even more so than what City of Angels shot for, since City of Angels and the original still wanted to be basically revenge action thrillers. Salvation is more of like a murder mystery of a kid trying to find out why he was framed for murder and trying to get revenge on the cops that screwed him over. It's actually a bit more psychological and does try to do its own thing with it. Really, the reason that movie sucks is because, well, this didn't have a lot of money. To put it very simply, this was really low budget. You can see it more than once, and multiple times it kind of feels like a CW show, which is funny because apparently The Crow actually got a CW show. I've never seen it, but that is a thing. But yeah, Salvation all around is one of those where you have to respect them trying to do something completely different than what the first two movies were doing. It wanted to have its own identity and lean into the fact that The Crow doesn't just have to be action movies. Now, of course, I do have to mention that this is a very teenager-focused story, to a degree where more than once it kind of feels more like a young adult novel adaptation than an actual, Crow story, which is weird because this one's actually adapting a Crow story. The Crow, The Lazarus Heart by Poppy S. Bright. But a lot of details are changed. For one, the characters in the actual book itself are a lot older. I mean, hell, the main guy is a photographer for S&M fetish shit, so, not exactly a teenager. It also took place in New Orleans and focused a lot more on the underground scene over there. Sexuality was a much larger theme in Lazarus Heart, focusing on the different gay groups in New Orleans, such as cross-dressers, transgenders, actual homosexuality. I mean, the protagonist was gay and had a husband, all of which obviously are missing in the movie. Now, I'm not saying if Salvation actually just full-on adapted Lazarus Heart, that would have been great. Lazarus Heart itself felt very preachy and more than a few times just kind of got stupid. Like, the entire reason behind why the serial killer is killing people is... just read it. It's fucking goofy. It's just goofy. But still, it had that bite and that edge that The Crow is meant to have. This very underground, punk, almost goth vibe to it. And Salvation feels like they just wanted to use the same story but water it down to the point that it's acceptable to a general audience. Even if it does have moments where it still tries to be kind of edgy. And honestly, the concept of a crow coming back to solve their own murder because they don't know who actually did it, it's at least something. So Salvation is at least up there as being a consistent movie that had an idea, it just wasn't well made. Now what about Wicked Prayer? Wicked Prayer sucks. You have Edward Furlong and enough meth to kill a fucking horse, and you have Dennis Hopper just going completely insane Dennis Hopper style in a story that really... it's like a sci-fi original mockbuster to The Crow, but it's wearing the name. Everything about it is just fucking weird and wonky. It's The Crow trying to fight a demon, which on paper sounds fucking metal, but when you actually watch it, it's like it embraces the full goth stereotype that was never actually what The Crow was about. Like they saw the Robot Chicken sketch that references the movie and thought that's what it was.
It doesn't matter. Existence is nothing but frustration and pain.
Yeah, it's bad. It's unspeakably bad. This is the RoboCop 3 of The Crow, just something that everyone goes, oh god, yeah, that happened. A terrible movie wearing the name, and it has no reason to exist beyond just they want to make some money off The Crow. And you wanna know what the best part is? This isn't even the worst one. Yeah, the actual hands-down worst sequel to The Crow is the remake, which says a lot. Coming out in 2024, starring Bill Skarsgård and directed by Rupert Sanders, the guy who is only really known for making Snow White and the Huntsman. Don't worry, I don't remember that movie either. The live-action Ghost in the Shell, and getting caught trying to bang Kristen Stewart back in like 2012. You get the point. Dude's not exactly a big name in cinema. To his credit, he's got an eye for visuals. As much as I don't like the live-action Ghost in the Shell movie, it looked really good. But his work on The Crow? What the fuck? Now, get the obvious out of the way, it's an actual miracle this movie even came out. This was a movie that suffered some serious development hell. It jumped around a lot from different directors, actors, whole studios. This movie was cursed. Kind of fits considering the weird circumstances around The Crow. Hell, originally Bill Skarsgård wasn't even meant to be the main guy in this. It was going to be Jason Momoa, who's actually a big fan of the comic. So him stepping away was not a great sign. Now, Bill Skarsgård's a great actor. Hell, that whole family's full of heavy hitters. Still showing up in some phenomenal stuff. And it's not like he can't do action films. Boy Kills World's a super underrated movie that's fucking amazing fight-wise. So having Bill in the role isn't inherently a bad move. Hell, it's actually a good idea. A great actor that can handle more physical action scenes, and really, that's kind of what makes this hurt all the worse. This isn't a cheap-ass sequel that looks like something you'd see on Sci-Fi at 3 a.m. This looks like a real movie. The visuals are slick, it's got good actors, everything around it should have worked, but the fact it all falls apart is what makes it sting. To get out of the way, no, it's not the worst movie ever made. To me, it's worse than that. The Crow remake's biggest sin is that it's boring, and that it fundamentally misunderstands what The Crow actually is as a story. You see, the movie thinks The Crow is essentially just the emo movie. That misunderstanding I've been trying to clarify the whole video. Yeah, it has goth aesthetic, but The Crow, at least the Brandon Lee film, is more about the importance of life and the people around you. If anything, it feels like it bucks against the nihilistic vibe that most people assume the story has. In all fairness, the original comic falls into the trappings more than once, but that's due to the insane circumstances of how it was made. Essentially, the comic was a man reeling from senseless tragedy, and the movie is the version you get when the first wave of pain is over. That I've got to get on my feet again moment. There's a lot of moments in the movie that feel directly like that, like when Eric is talking with Albrecht in his apartment, or when he sees the trick-or-treaters running around just laughing. Able to enjoy the simple little moment of seeing these kids be happy. The Crow remake just goes, Eric is goth, right? So let's make him a junkie, and Shelly's a junkie. They're both sad, depressed, even though as stated, that's not The Crow. Eric was never a fuck-up. In the original comic, he was a mechanic with a pretty put-together life, and in the movie, he's a rock star that's starting to get big, and also had a pretty good life. The entire point is that Eric's life falls apart from the pointless and random attack. He's ruined by what happened, which plays into why he's able to resurrect. That fall is crucial for the story, that there was a ledge in the first place. The remake doesn't just make Eric a fuck up out the gate, but it goes out of its way to set up every detail. You see Eric meet Shelly, they establish Eric has childhood trauma that fuels his drug addiction. Shelly's established as pissing off a drug dealer that wants to hunt her down. Said drug dealer made a deal with Satan for supernatural powers. There's so much fat to this movie that it really all ends up being pointless. What made The Crow interesting was simplicity. Much of the actual attack in the original movie scattered because it's Eric's mind trying to make sense of the last moments of his life. The movie opens up on him and Shelly already dead, and then Eric resurrects a year later. You learn all you need to based on the character actions and witty dialogue. You can easily piece together what the gang's whole deal is just based on how they talk and banter with each other. Those small moments with Eric and Shelly in the flashbacks tell you everything. This was a warm, happy bond that was ruined by sociopaths. Another point that's frustrating is that the reboot wants to focus harder on the actual bond between Eric and Shelly. It's got way more importance story-wise than even in the original. And the two have zero chemistry in this. Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs, that's literally her name, have zero moments where it feels like they really actually bond. Every scene still feels like they just barely know each other. There's no that moment where you could tell Eric would die for her. The entire emotional crux of the story that Eric would literally come back from the dead to avenge Shelly is basically non-existent. They try to replicate it. Like I said, there's way more scenes of the two bonding, and I put that in quotes, and their bond, once again, in quotes, has way more of an actual emphasis, but you just never buy it. We see Shelly for a total of like 5 minutes in the original movie, and it feels substantially more powerful, because ironically, you don't need to show every second of their relationship, just enough to make it clear that Shelly is the reason for all of this. Eric comes back from the dead for her. Yeah, technically he's brought back because his death was also terrible, but he's doing it for Shelly. Even the comic makes it clear. Eric doesn't care about himself anymore. It's about the love of his life. He's already dead, and the best he can do is just make sure they're not lonely in the afterlife. It also doesn't help that the main bad guys are just astoundingly boring. Remember how I said the dialogue in the original never wastes a word? It's all witty, tells you everything about the characters, and it's always interesting to hear.
Well, gentlemen, by all means, I think we ought to have an introspective moment of silence for poor old Tintin.
Yeah, the remake feels so fucking dry in comparison. The bad guy's just a bad guy. He's an evil rich dude drug dealer that made a deal with Satan for eternal life. Kind of a cool concept, but Top Dollar's league's more fun in his portrayal. The guy was a total nihilist that genuinely enjoys causing chaos. He was pissed off when his big chaos event, Riot, Devil's Night, became too popular. Even as Eric dismantles his operation, the guy's more excited than pissed off. He actually kind of likes Eric, even admitting that he was the one that ordered their deaths. He never needed to do this, hell, it was easy to assume. Eric probably even knew, but he does it simply out of respect for him for standing up to him. There's a lot of layers to Top Dollar, which elevates him from just being a typical bad guy. You can see why he's the boss instantly. The way he commands the room, how he speaks to his henchmen, even when he does the typical kills one of his own guys for pissing him off trope, it actually works. Because you can tell he doesn't believe Gideon's story and thinks he's covering for the guy that killed Tintin. Meanwhile, the reboot bad guy is the bad guy. He calls his henchmen and is like, you better get those meddling kids. Then they get the meddling kids, and then Eric crows out and meddles all over the place. I should probably talk about how Eric and Shelly really die. You never see the full extent of what happens to Eric and Shelly in the original. It's always kept vague and more told and implied. But the information you're given alone is haunting. Eric is beaten, shot, and forced to watch as Shelly's raped and tortured. It's an absurdly grisly death, which is the entire point. It's so horrible because it's exactly the circumstances needed for someone to become a crow. You can't just die, you have to die in such a terrible way your soul cannot rest. The crow is essentially a revenant or a death spirit haunting their killers. In the remake, they get plastic bagged, and I guess they're thrown into a river, but that might have just been a metaphor for Eric actually dying. In fact, it actually was. Holy shit, it was. So yeah, they just get plastic bagged. I mean, yeah, that's still a shitty way to die, but really? That absolute horror that Eric and Shelly are put through is so neutered. You need that level of edge to make the story work. The one thing that's supposed to be over the top and edgy is the most watered down aspect. Or would they scare people would be upset if Shelly got raped to death? The entire point of The Crow is to be upsetting. It's a grim story about revenge and the pain of loss. Or maybe it's because the bad guys are just bad guys working for a man in a suit, so they thought the rape would have been unprofessional. Coming back to the issue where the bad guys are just boring. I don't believe for a second these dudes would quote Paradise Lost. The guys in the original are just scumbags and street trash, yeah, I could totally buy the feel how awful goodness is quote from T-Bird.
Abashed the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is.
You wanna know the worst part? The adaptation actually includes some cool concepts. The idea that Limbo is an abandoned train station full of crows, cool visual. I like that idea. The idea you see more of Eric struggling to figure out what's happened to him when he resurrects? Not a bad idea, not necessary, but not bad. They even have a guy that's basically the Skull Cowboy. He's not, it's some dude named Kronos, but he's basically kind of serving the same role. The idea that Eric was chosen because the main bad guy isn't supposed to be alive and is pissing off the spirit world by selling people's souls to Satan? Alright, I'm down for that. Complicates things beyond the simplicity, but it's not a bad concept, even if it basically means that Eric is the spirit world's hitman, and the whole point of The Crow is that it's a personal vendetta, but whatever, it's personal for Eric. Another thing to mention is that the actual design of The Crow, yeah, that's bad. That's just bad. One look tells you everything. It's very lazy, and what some 50-year-old producer thinks kids view as cool. Eric's design in the original is iconic. The leather jacket, the long hair, the face paint, everything meshes together. Because while it is edgy, it's not really trying to be edgy. Eric's design is based off rock stars like Iggy Pop with a sort of Harlequin jester flair to him. I've also heard that he's inspired by the lead singer of Bauhaus in some ways. He's a punk rocker with a darker vibe to him. At times it can basically look like the Joker, but all in black. The reboot's design is quoted as being inspired by Lil Peep and Post Malone. So instead of an interesting fusion of punk, glam rock, and the Joker, you get TikTok rappers. Like I said, a producer's idea of cool. Even if you think the original movie's gay and you beat up fans of it in high school, everyone thinks the design of Eric is dope. There's a sincerity to the original design that can't be beat. You can tell the crew all thought it was cool, and it was cool. It was simple. Just a dude dressed in black with face paint. And that somehow feels more fleshed out than the reboot's design with all the tattoos and weird black oil eye thingies. Another thing I don't like is how much Eric bumbles in the beginning. Like, dude, you can't die. Why are you fumbling so much? Could have had some awesome action scenes of Eric breaking his body apart to get to the bad guys, since he knows he can just regenerate. The original does this multiple times. Hell, Eric lets himself get injured on purpose, specifically to fuck with people. Like when Gideon shoots him, or Funboy, or when Top Dollar has his guys shoot him. Eric gets shot a lot in the original. It actually says a lot about his character and abilities. The reason people avoid pain is the sensation is the human brain screaming at you, don't do that again, you fucking idiot. Since pain means hurt, and hurt means dead. So what happens when he can't die? Well, it means that pain's pointless. You see multiple times in the original that Eric just seems to flat out ignore pain. He'll play up being hurt to screw with somebody, but it's clear he's not really feeling it. He can still be pushed back, but he's not hurt by it. Eric in the reboot seems to still go out of his way to avoid pain, which at that point it's basically false tension. Like, we know the guy's immortal. Why even pretend he could be hurt by something? If they wanted to make Eric genuinely vulnerable, well, the original figured that out too. If the crow dies or is injured, then Eric could get hurt or die. Now, the reboot tries to add a new mechanic to the story, that Eric's immortality is tied to his love for Shelly. If he starts to doubt their bond, he's more vulnerable, which, alright, that's kind of gay and dumb, but whatever. But they still don't take full advantage of this. There's a scene where this comes into play, but it's quickly forgotten about when Eric is like, alright, she was still kind of cool though. And like I said, this is a dumb idea because they made it clear that the spirit world didn't bring Eric back because of how him and Shelly died. He's brought back because Kronos wanted him to kill the main bad guy for making a deal with Satan and fucking up the spirit world. What's the point of this mechanic when the idea this time is that Eric is essentially acting like a hitman? And it's really dumb because Kronos scolds Eric for doubting Shelly and basically going, oh, you blew your chance, you can never get revenge again, when the whole point is he didn't send him back for revenge, he sent him there for a job. Like, he needs Eric to go kill the main bad guy. And the circumstances around Eric doubting Shelly are stupid because he saw a video of her obviously being brainwashed by the bad guy that we know brainwashes people into killing somebody. So Eric's like, oh my god, she's a murderer, why'd she never tell me? It's like, dude, the bad guy's obviously pulling strings. The same main bad guy Kronos made very clear to you has supernatural abilities due to his deal with the devil. How this segment's especially egregious since this ends on Eric getting a power boost. So Kronos was holding Eric's power level back until this arbitrary moment. The guy that, once again, Kronos needs to go kill the main bad guy, and he was holding him back and didn't tell him about shit like this that actually kinda super mattered. But it ends with him trading his soul spot for Shelly, meaning he's damned to hell when he dies.
My soul for hers.
Her soul is damned.
Even though Kronos brought Eric back specifically because the people the main bad guy kills are not supposed to go to hell in the first place. Oh my god. Shut up. Don't think about it. Tragic sacrifice. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. As you can see, the movie's got problems. It's like they watched The Crow half asleep and were like, yeah, Eric and Shelly were those drugged out people in that apartment, right? And Eric got hurt because Shelly wanted to be with her daughter more than him. Basically, I'm saying they rebooted The Crow and made Funboy and Darla the main characters, on top of adding weird, contradictory rules that don't make sense when you think about them. Even taking away the fact that the entire point of the revenge journey is to avenge Shelly. If Eric was given a chance in the original to bring her back, we could fully buy him doing that. Like, he chases vengeance at first, then later learns that there's a way to bring her back from the dead. It would have been very Hollywood and kind of a cheap, schmaltzy way of ending the story, but you could buy it going that direction. The reboot makes it clear early on the whole quest is to bring Shelly back, and it feels leagues more artificial. The whole story addresses, builds up to, and commits to the idea Eric is going on this journey to resurrect her, to pull her soul out of hell and return her to life. So he's not even doing this for vengeance. The guys he kills are just obstacles getting in the way of the prize. That's why none of the main bad guys seem particularly hateable or have any real character, because they're just mooks. Hell, were the guys in the Opera House even really involved in the main bad guy? To be fair, it was his Opera House, at least I think it was, but these could have just been random security guards. They saw a tweaker with a sword running around and were like, oh shit, this guy's dangerous, keep him from hurting innocent people. And then Eric butchers them. He even throws their heads to the crowd on stage, like, why? This crowd wasn't involved in the main bad guy, these were just people in a crowd watching an opera show. And it's weird for me to complain about this because I usually love Orifar moments like this where I'm like, oh fuck yeah, that's metal as shit. But Eric in the original was never really a cruel guy. Yeah, he was cruel to the people that fucked him over, but to innocent people, he was nice. He would help them more than once or just try to get out of their way. He knows they're not involved and there's no reason to fuck with them. And I mean, in all seriousness, we can assume the security guards were the mercenaries and the main bad guy, but the point is, the villains have so little personality, I genuinely couldn't tell the difference between an amoral mercenary or corrupt cop and some random guy at the wrong place at the wrong time. He doesn't know them. You never get a sense of who they are or what they want. They're just the dickbags that need to die. Which for a revenge story is kind of all you really need. You don't really find out everything about the organization that John Wick fights, but you don't have that personal touch behind why you want these assholes dead. And yeah, the idea that Eric isn't even really the crow until the last action scene is baffling. Like, Kronos could have just given him this power since the beginning to complete the objective he really needs completed. Yet he held back until Eric got his ass kicked, got more people killed, and then let the main bad guy figure out what was going on. Which is another dumb part because the point of the Crow is that the supernatural bleeds into the modern world and no one knows how to handle it. How do you fight a ghost? A ghost with a very personal vendetta against you. The story establishes that the main bad guy made a deal with literal Satan, so he knows more about the supernatural than Eric does. Which is just kind of weird and unnecessary, because if he's aware to this extent that demons, hell, and the land of the dead are all real, why does he have just random goons and mercenaries fighting for him? They couldn't figure out a way to have bad guys that could exploit the supernatural against Eric? It could have been like The Darkness 2, where Eric is going up against an organization that knows more about the Crow than he does. Fucking Top Dollar does that, and he doesn't even believe Eric was a ghost until he saw him get shot to pieces and get back up.
For a ghost, you bleed just fine.
A dude literally makes a deal with Satan himself for power, and Satan never told him about the whole thing of Kronos bringing certain people back from the dead. It seems to hint that he's at least aware of the concept, but he never does anything. Just a single part at the very end where he tries to use his preacher voice of God power on Eric. Like, dude, he was selling people to hell to live forever. That was the whole point behind all of this. Why not go nuts with the demon powers? He should be focusing on just a way to make Eric go away. The ending is also fucking bonkers. Eric kills main bad guy by having him dragged to hell, which is actually not a bad death, it's kind of metal. But then Kronos is like, okay, Eric, time to go to hell so Shelly can be revived. And Eric's like, okay, time to go to hell then. And then Shelly's resurrected to before Eric came back to life. It's the night they both died. So theoretically, the main bad guys could be back to life and trying to kill her. Like, Eric choosing to go to hell to save Shelly is fine. I don't care about that. It was meant to be a tragic sacrifice. But Shelly specifically taken to the night they both died. So she could be with her friends and family who the main bad guy would later on kill as the story went on. And unless Kronos specifically mentions all the bad guys are still dead, that means Satan Douchebag is back to life as well. Or at the very least, a lot of his goons that are actively gunning for them. Like, dude, you kind of made the whole movie pointless. You over-explain everything else in the movie, yet you don't explain the literal time travel at the very end to make it clear Shelly won't just be immediately tracked down and killed again. Granted, we see Eric is still in the land of the dead, not hell. So maybe Kronos pussed out, or he was lying, or maybe Eric is just gonna stay as a crow to protect her. I don't know. It's a slap-together attempt at sequel bait. Even Bill Skarsgård called that out. And do you wanna know what the worst part is? There's a genuinely good movie buried deep in all this. It just comes down to the script. It has good visuals, good action, good music choices, a good lead actor. There's potential here. And that's why this is the worst Crow sequel. The others all easily fall apart. City of Angels is painful because there was a vision that got raped by a fat pig. But the other two are cheap cash-ins that never really gave a shit. Salvation had some ideas, but it just kind of cheaply adapted one of the stories and barely gave it any money at all. And Wicked Prayer is just funny. The remake is the worst because so much effort was spent on everything but the most important part of it, the actual story. And not even a way where you can say, the story sucked but the fight scenes were cool. No, it was so cheap and lazy that it's the epitome of surf Dracula. An up its own ass attempt at building up to all the iconic stuff the original comic movie didn't waste time on, because it knew that's what brought people in. You don't even get a good fight scene till the final act of the movie. It's like if a Spider-Man movie spent 2 hours on Peter graduating high school, running his apartment, getting a job at the Bugle, meeting MJ, spending time with MJ, meeting Norman Osborn, spending time with Osborn, then the last 20 minutes gets bit by the spider, gets superpowers, and then rushes into a fight with Green Goblin. It's a weird aversion towards just getting to the fucking point. Explaining every single detail doesn't make a story better, especially if it grinds the pace to a halt. If anything, it actively gets in the way of the immersion, to just let the audience sink in and buy the fantasy. The original movie does everything necessary to get you into the story without explaining much of anything. You have Sarah give a monologue about how crows have a fable about taking the souls of the dead to the afterlife. But sometimes the death is so terrible they let the soul come back to put things right. That is all you need. Anyone asking for anything more is a nerd, and we fucking hate those here. Hell, the guy who wrote the movie is Zach Balin, who's done some good shit. He wrote Creed 3, Gran Turismo, King Richard. This isn't some dipshit who's incompetent at his job. You really have to wonder just what the fuck happened here. And I think the answer simply comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding to what makes The Crow interesting to people. It screams producer meddling. The idea of The Crow being inspired by Post Malone screams some dickhead from the studio with one of those fucking gay-ass earpieces going, the chart would go up if you reference current thing rapper. Hell, if this took any longer to come out, I'd probably have a fucking obligatory Bad Bunny cameo. And not even a good one, like Bullet Train. The cast is made up of Randys beyond some big names that absolutely screams line go up choices. Like, Bill Skarsgård's good, but who the fuck is FKA Twigs? I googled her and she's some kind of pop star, so I guess that makes sense. But once again, you have pop and rap inspirations for a movie that's supposed to be inspired by rock and punk music. Eric and Shelly are drug addicts because I guess that's what kids think is cool. Being a self-flagellating loser that enjoys fucking their own life up and feeling bad about it later. The main bad guy is some dude who's also Satan because dark and edgy, right? Like The Crow, right? Even though you find out literally nothing about him beyond that. This has gone on way longer than intended, but you get the point. The Crow remake sucks. I hate it. And I hate it because I want to like it. It's a movie that refuses to get out of its own way. It can't even be funny bad or outright incompetent. It has to tease you with moments that remind you, oh, they could have actually made a good movie if they wanted to. Maybe this is another case like City of Angels, and there's a lot left on the cutting room floor that could have salvaged it. But still, dear God, it's frustrating. Frustrating that it was this close to being good and actively chose to keep stepping back. It's like seeing a dude run a marathon, then just stop at the finish line. He keeps pointing at you specifically and going, wouldn't it be cool if I won? If I just took one more step and beat everybody? That'd be cool, right? And you're screaming for it to just dedicate. You don't need Surf Dracula Crow, you just need The Crow. But what made The Crow cool was that everyone involved in the original thought it was cool. They liked the world it built, the characters, and adapted whole scenes down to the spirit and sometimes dialogue. The remake feels like they just got the name and were like, fuck it, maybe this will make some money. Still, that's The Crow. A good movie, a good comic series, and some god-awful sequels. I can wholeheartedly recommend the first movie. City of Angels is tragic for what happened to it, but until someone can get their hands on the original version and leak it out, you're stuck with a butchered one. There is a fan edit called Second Coming that tries to be closer to the vision, but they can only do so much. And it's been rumored for years that there is an actual watchable print of the original vision out there, but it's locked up in some vault somewhere and we're never getting it. Now, Salvation is kind of a quaint attempt. It's not completely garbage, but you can also see that, like, okay, yeah, this is where this franchise is just going to keep going down. But it has some ideas. There's some inspiration to it. It's not a terrible watch. It's not a good movie, but at the very least, you can go, oh yeah, I've seen that one. And Wicked Prayer is Wicked Prayer. I'm still kind of convinced that was a fever dream and that movie doesn't actually exist. And the remake is frustrating with how it does everything. From a completely out-of-touch idea of what's cool, a wonky-ass retelling of the lore, fucking up the fundamental bond that made the story special, it's just bad. Brandon Lee died to make the original movie as special as it was. It was a fucking tragedy that he's gone, considering how much effort and talent he put into this. And every sequel ever since has just reminded everyone how much of a lightning in a bottle the original really ended up being. Just stick with Brandon Lee, Crow. It's a legitimately fantastic movie, and everything else will just make you sad. Not even in a good way. In a way that you'll actually feel disgusted how producers keep whoring this IP out when it was only meant to be something of complete sincerity and creativity. The City of Angels production story legitimately made me angry. They had so many people specifically saying, we don't want to step on the toes of the original, that was Brandon's movie, we're respecting that. Just for this fat fuck to barge in and go, make it like the first movie, that'll make line go up. That exact heart and sincerity keeps being ripped out, and they wonder why all these sequels suck. It's removing the element that makes The Crow work. Maybe eventually we can get a Crow movie that gives a shit again. Hell, let Jason Momoa get a shot. He wanted to be in the reboot, and he likes the franchise. Maybe he'll be a name that could be good for it. But the point is, this needs to be stories about humanity again. But concerning the rare things, I doubt we're seeing that for a while. So once again, a video that's gone on way longer than intended. I'm actually shocked how much I had to bitch about the reboot. And no doubt, I'm way past the Valentine's estimate for this, but it's worth it. The Crow is one of my favorite movies, so it deserves the respect. And you should really check this series out. There's more than a few great comics, and James O'Barr genuinely loves this series. Maybe one day you can get the Bride movies he's been wanting to make for years out the door, but who knows. Still, I recommend The Crow. I also recommend Gamer Subs. Use code CHAL at checkout. Use the code. The code's good. If you died and came back to life, you'll be called The Code instead of The Crow. You'll drink so much Gamer Subs. Use the code. Use the code. Use the code or won't be put up for the night. But yeah, we can finally call it here. I'm very tired. Thinking about the Crow sequels makes me sad. Hopefully you guys have a new appreciation for the original movie. It's fantastic. Rest in peace, Brandon Lee. You are a hell of an actor. And I would have loved to have seen the timeline where you're still kicking ass on the big screen. But that's not reality. And we just have to deal with it. See you guys. Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I am now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're gonna plant crack in your house, and they're gonna arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.